The Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Welcome to the Provoke Media Podcast. I'm Megan Miller, Head of Content Partnerships at Provoke and host of today's episode. Today, we bring you Cyberattacks, Preparing for the Inevitable with ARPR. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the primary targets of cyber attacks were governmental organizations, financial service brands, and large high-tech firms. Today, every industry from supply chains to healthcare to retail and businesses of all sizes are targets for cyber criminals. In this episode, we discuss the critical information marketing and communications professionals need about today's heightened cybersecurity landscape, as well as the tools they should prepare for before an attack occurs. We'll also explore the top considerations for breach response. With us today to do that are Anna Ruth Williams, Founder and Chief Strategy Officer at ARPR, and Geoff Blaine, Senior VP and Chief Marketing Officer at SonicWall. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Great day to chat about cybersecurity. Geoff, if you want to give us a little background about where you come to from this conversation, and then we'll bounce to Anna and we'll kind of set the stage here.
Yeah, sure. So I have a heavy background in content and corporate communications and also in cybersecurity. So I've been in the cybersecurity industry for 16, 17 years now. So I have a good perspective on, what companies can go through, particularly in the first, 48, 72 hours and best practices for, staying prepared and staying ready and, what to expect and what to do in that time of crisis. Absolutely.
And Anna Ruth, you obviously have many experiences with your own clients, helping them navigate these undesirable situations, and doing so in such a painless way as possible. So you want to give us a little background about what ARPR does and kind of where your experience comes to the table for this subject.
Yeah, absolutely. So ARPR represents technology, B2B SaaS-based companies. And unfortunately, many of our clients have faced data breaches within the past 2 years even. We're seeing an acceleration of that as well. We do have our own cybersecurity practice group at ARPR that represents cybersecurity companies. So we even have more acute knowledge and expertise within the inner workings of cyber criminals and their motivations, as well as what happens during breaches. So we work with clients on the front end before a breach even occurs with crisis comms planning and cybersecurity readiness with their marketing teams. And then, of course, we support them during and after the crisis when we go into rapid response and then reputation management mode.
It's a hard thing for people to want to prepare for. No one wants to think about the fact that they may need this at some point, but the preparedness component for these things can really make the inevitable go so much more smoothly.
Yeah. It also reduces stress and anxiety among the entire team, right? When we have a plan on the shelf that we can pull off, and it helps us think more rationally.
Absolutely. Geoff, if you don't mind, setting the backdrop for us a little bit, how cybercrime has become much more prevalent, what's driving that increase, and why is it becoming so necessary to have practices like ARPRs?
Yeah, I mean, cybercrime has been around since the advent of the internet. I don't think that's any news in itself, but it's really been amplified to a new level as of late, in the last 5-10 years. So much so, I think even more like in the last 2 to 3 years, it's pretty much household terminology at this point. I think the common person probably has a good idea what ransomware is. 5-10 years ago, or not 10 years ago, it didn't exist, but 5, 7, 8 years ago, ransomware, what is that? Maybe they knew malware. They probably knew virus and phishing. But it's just mainstream news. It's linked to everything from, education, healthcare, geopolitical conflicts, and talking about the the increase. Ransomware alone, increased 105% year over year in 2021. And these types of attacks, because they can be financially motivated, politically motivated. There's a lot of hacktivism that goes around. So it's really hard to pinpoint, what's driving or what the motive is or what the agenda is, because it's, like a lot of cyber criminal or criminal activity for that matter. There's a lot of, different things that drive people to do that. But then it's like the problem is really compounded when organizations aren't proactive enough in setting policy, ensuring that they have a sound and in best practice based security posture, having policy around patching. It just gives cyber criminals a much greater attack vector and many more targets of opportunity. And the double clicking into that, cyber criminals are really more in tune with, the lack of response, the lack of preparation than ever before. They have readily available tools that allows them to find weaknesses in organizations' network, whether that's, something that's not patched, whether it's a 0 day, they're out there looking every single hour of every single day, regardless of the size of your organization.
That's a lot of technological terms. It's a lot to it feels like it's a glossary in and of itself for, business owners or marketing comms, people who maybe would prefer to not have to know those things. And Anna Ruth, is there some, are there areas that your practice or that you've seen where you've been able to just sort of even familiarizing with that terminology or setting that foundation has eased or is able to ease a little bit, make it less scary?
Yeah. So I'll kind of talk, I think the best way to answer that, Megan, would be to talk through what to do before and then in the first 48 hours, right? So as I alluded to earlier, before a crisis even emerges, first of all, you have to know that it's inevitable now. It's not an if, it's a when. Now, the severity of the attack depends on, to Geoff's point, your security posture going into it. Unfortunately, that's a bit out of marketing's control, right? That's on the other side of the house with IT's compliance, risk, et cetera. So from the marketing and communications perspective, you want to have a robust crisis communications plan on the shelf. You would be shocked, maybe not shocked, but very surprised at how few corporations, in particular, when you go down into small and mid-sized businesses, have a crisis comms plan on the shelf. In that plan should include cyber scenario planning. In every crisis plan we put together for clients, there's always going to be a cyber readiness, because the way we approach a data breach is going to be very different than the way we're going to approach a natural disaster, right? Or CEO misconduct, right? So that's first. The other thing is that, and Geoff can speak more technically here, but the IT department will have an incident response plan. Just like think of them as the parallel. Like marketing should have crisis comms plan, there's going to be an incident response plan that's on the IT side of the house. Both have to understand and read the other's plans and actually integrate them. So when making your crisis comms plan, or if you're working with an outside vendor on doing that, you have to have read the incident response plan and make sure that they have alignment, right? So that's before. The first 48 hours, a lot of times that's dictated by how the attack was first uncovered. Mm-hmm. And Geoff, would you say that the majority of attacks today are first discovered on the dark web?
Yeah, usually that's a pretty common early indicator. Either you'll, like if you take ransomware, for example, either you'll make first contact from the threat actor itself, or you'll have a forensic firm or a government body reach out to you and they see evidence on the dark web of it. In my experiences, those are pretty commonly the top two. When it boils up to mainstream, it'll be on social media, and then, you better to your point, you better have your communication plan ready.
Correct. And I'll say, if you're a B2B company, I have actually seen the anomaly initially detected by a customer. This actually happened just with one of our health IT clients. And so it really depends. The first 48 hours is first going to be dictated by how was this even discovered, right? Ideally, the marketing team should be looped in ASAP. So instead of having legal, risk, and IT being the only ones in the inner circle, they've got to bring in marketing. Because to Geoff's point, as soon as this emerges on social, the communications crisis plan has to be activated, right?
You're now in reaction mode at that point, really.
Exactly. We got to go into rapid response. So in terms of the marketing activation workflow, first define the level of crisis. Most of the time, and I like to define crisis 1, 2, 3, 4, with 4 being the least, right? 4 being an angry customer on Twitter about something, and 1 being corporate reputation is immediately at risk, right? And so most of the time you're going to put a cyber incident in immediately in level 1 or 2. And if it's in level 2, it has a high risk of escalating into level 1 if not managed appropriately, right? So first, define the crisis. Number 2, you want to escalate media and social monitoring ASAP. So putting new search terms in your media monitoring software, Google Alerts, having also putting in those search terms in your social management platform, right? And this monitoring needs to happen 24/7. So designate someone on the marketing team, rotate time slots. We've helped clients with this before, right? Megan, you get 8 a.m. to noon. Geoff, you get noon to 4, and so on, right? And as soon as that monitoring is activated, begin crafting the holding statements and that messaging. That should also include an internal comms lens. And I'm including board communication and investor communication in that internal bucket, right? So begin drafting those holding statements, and we can talk a little bit more about the tone and voice and everything and how that messaging will evolve, but I'll save that. Then I would say, I guess I'm getting, what am I on point number 3, 4 now is 3 or 4, begin developing a working FAQ. This FAQ is going to be a living and breathing document throughout the crisis. As Geoff alluded to, the forensic team peels back the onion layers of how the breach occurred, the extent of it, and the mitigation and resolution.
And would you call that an internal FAQ or an external FAQ?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
And in my experience, the internal FAQ usually evolves into the external FAQ throughout the investigation process. So, one thing I really wanted to hit on, Anna Ruth, is the internal comms standpoint, particularly that first holding statement. Like if there's enough chatter, like whether it's social media or customers, if you have online communities, and they call in like a support person or reach out to their salesperson or whatever, it depends on the company, but then they're like, I have no idea what happens. They should at least be prepared, have some situational awareness that something is happening, even if it is a fairly generic statement. It shows a level of preparedness and confidence in the company and the brand, and understanding what's happening. And to your point, the first 48 hours, it's going to be there's a fog of war to it a little bit, and how you operate and your response there will be dissected later on. So I can't reiterate enough of how important it is to be factual, confident, but transparent during that process.
Completely agree. And message consistency. Consistency, to Geoff's point, your customer success team needs to immediately have that messaging, but that has to be consistent with the others. And I would add to that, when you send that internal memo, and by the way, this can take the shape of a memo, it can be a town hall, right? Whatever is proper protocol based on the level of crisis, as well as how you normally communicate transparently internally. You have got to include a very strongly worded statement to your employees that if they receive a media inquiry, they have to immediately escalate that, and that no one in the company is authorized to speak on behalf of the company externally, unless you are speaking to a customer with, this message that's been provided.
And a follow on to that, even you could put confidential and, all that in the email, but you have to assume whatever you send out company wide or wide to a large group that it will get out. So draft with that in mind. You can warn and ask and all that, but just assume, because, we've seen that time and time again in the media, that leaks to a journalist. I got an internal memo that this is going on. So that's a very important, small but important point that usually can change the scope and of how you operate, during the time of crisis.
One other best practice on that point is you can set up a dedicated hotline or a dedicated email address. And that often, it really lets you have the back of the sales, the customer support, right? They can say, blah statement, if you have further questions, call this 1-800 number or email this, incident at blah company URL. And so that allows then a couple things. One, it has their back and allows them to move traffic somewhere else. But it also gives you intelligence internally about the sentiment of your customers and the public. And if they have experienced any anomalies as a result of that, it gives you intelligence about what they're thinking, feeling, and finding on their own. And that can be very helpful, both on the forensic side, but also on the reputational risk side, right?
Yeah. It's interesting, as we talk about the internal messaging, like one theme that we're seeing and hearing a lot right now in PR and reputation brand management is this notion or idea that every employee is a brand spokesperson. And the level to which we're able to communicate internally really can define how we're reflected externally, whether we like it or not. So really equipping and empowering people can still have a very managed message and a very, safe message, to your point, Geoff, about what you want to be out to the general public, but also preparing your staff to know exactly where to go and exactly know the protocol and the steps that they need to take so that they feel it's very clear and that they know.
And I think, and I think that point is really highlighted, or, the importance of that point is really highlighted when you're talking about your customer success team, your sales teams, and, those one-on-one conversations that they may have with partners or customers, et cetera. You kind of mentioned it, that they are at that point in that moment, the number one brand ambassador for you. Now there's, they're one-on-one conversations. So it's not like they have a wide aperture of, who they're talking to, but like it or not, you need to arm them to, have the best success in those engagements.
And one more complexity to all this is that sometimes the breach occurs because of, or the employee becomes the vector, right, for the breach. Mm-hmm. So phishing attacks are a prime example there. And that can add a complexity too. If you just think about internal feelings and internal politics around these. And that has to be addressed. And one thing we haven't talked about directly, I think, is if a company has a breach, they're a victim. The company is the victim, but externally, rarely are you going to be seen as the victim. You're going to be seen as the offender. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a lot of blame placed on you. And it's easy to be defensive in tonality in those situations, but you have to be humble. And a lot of times I've seen breaches actually occur through a third-party integrator or something like that. But that company, even though they could have had the tightest compliance risk, they could be doing all their regular patching, blah, 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 they still are going to take that blame because they integrated with the company that was the victim. So.
Yeah, not to get too.
Go ahead. Sorry,
Megan. To that point, and not to get too technical, some of the world's largest breaches were through third party partners, integrators, and then, it's lateral attack movement. They find a vulnerable third party, and then they can laterally map their way into the target organization. But to your point, like, it's how you respond in that first 24, 36 hours, whatever the time frame is, whether you become the victim, a proactive victim, or a defensive, offender. And it's up to you. It's up to the communicators, the PR team, the marketers, and how you're seen in that light when the dust settles on it all.
Yeah, I would imagine that's exactly like such a right moment to kind of fall into a pitfall, which might be to be too vague, or like when you're defensive or feeling kind of on guard, like not putting enough information out there, not fully equipping your staff. That can be a tough one to come back from too.
It is, but initially you have to be vague because you're not going to have all the answers yet. You're not going to know the extent of the damage, extent of the leakage, right? You're not going to know how much customer data, for example, was compromised. And so in the beginning, your holding statements and your FAQ and everything, they're going to have to be a little vague, and you're going to have to be humble and transparent and say, our forensics team is diligently investigating, and we will be releasing additional information as we have it, but it's tough because you kind of have to be vague in those first 48 hours. The thing you don't want to do is say, we're confident that no customer data was leaked, because you don't know that 100% for sure first. And you don't want to have to eat words. That's the worst thing that could happen.
I mean, you see that all the time in breaking news, how much wrong information comes out in the first hours after the fact. But this is kind of no different than that. So you got to be very, very careful, and you slowly expand the messaging as you rule out, or through an analysis, investigation, fact finding. As you rule things out, you can expand the messaging and then communicate that. But it is really a critical time, in one of these events, and how you react.
Absolutely. Geoff, you're in a really unique position, being marketer by trade, but working for a global security firm. Advice for fellow CMOs who maybe don't have their plan in place yet?
Yeah, I mean, start now if you don't first, and have routine coordination with your internal stakeholders. I think that's where Anna Ruth kind of started on this. It's not just, your IT team or your security team or your legal team. That'll be dictated on the size of your organization, what vertical or line of business you're in. But I work for a security company, so we have these weekly. I don't know for every company that's quite necessarily, but a monthly meeting is not out of the realm of possibility of what you should be doing, because it's that alignment and that's cross-team collaboration that'll keep you prepared, keep you calm when it does happen. To Anna Ruth's point, you'll have that playbook on the shelf ready to go. And I always err on the side of caution, even for the littlest things that I think are going to have reach the media. I always have a statement ready, and it could be the smallest, most insignificant thing, but I always feel better because I hate scrambling. I hate fire drills. I like being prepared. And this isn't a little thing. This is a big thing. And in many cases, for many companies, a cyber incident, any type of breach is probably going to be not only the most disruptive crisis comms thing, but one of the most likely. So you kind of put those two things together, and you can see why you need to be prepared. But another point is, having a routine around it. Once you fall out of practice, once you get apathetic, you kind of leave yourself vulnerable, because you can meet for a few weeks, a few quarters, whatever. You got a plan. Oh, we can skip this week. And before long, you haven't met in 6 months. Mm-hmm. And, I'm unlucky enough as that would have been when something would happen, but just being ready, having the internal stakeholders from all the groups, knowing the plan, knowing what to do. It's just so important. Now, depending on the organization, hopefully that's not necessarily driven by the CMO, but the CMO, because assuming corporate comms falls under, marketing, they're going to be the public facing, entity. They're going to handle the comms. They're going to be on, their team's going to be manning social, manning the the journalists and the media, manning, online communities, so outside of support and sales, marketing and corporate comms is, the third leg of, sort of that triad.
Yeah. One thing that just popped in my mind we didn't talk about earlier, we should have, is those key messages is whoever manages your chat bot, right? Or whoever manages, if you do have a human that manages the online Q&A, that's really important to engage them. Geoff, I have an opinion on this, but I'm curious in yours. You said, oh, wait, go back. I'm forgetting. You said something around, the weekly meetings, the monthly meetings. Curious what best practices for that are. Is it the IT security team are sharing recent vulnerabilities that marketing should be aware of? Should marketing do any readouts during those?
It would probably depend on how mature your program is. In organizations I've been, if you're starting from, day one, you're probably going to have a lot of process brainstorming, defining, who the players are, what the processes are, what needs to be done. There's going to be a lot of that kind of work, which marketing and communications probably, with legal and maybe like support are going to play a bigger role. Once you mature it enough and you've got that, solidified, then you're probably going to pivot to the more, the security teams, the IT teams, keeping everyone abreast of, what's going on. And even if it's simple updates from them, it's not like every company is going to have a salvo of attacks, weekly. Let's hope not. But they could be like, hey, talking about what they're doing from, a cybersecurity awareness training, what they're doing, maybe we're implementing a new level of two-factor authentication just to keep the group, apprised of what's going on and have the best situational awareness. Ours are a lot more technical than that because of the business we're in, but I think, that's how I would see it form and mature as you kind of grow it.
Mm-hmm. Kind of question for both of you. Like, it's pretty evident that there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And, we're talking today from like the comms and marketing perspective, but when we talk about these meetings, Geoff, who's kind of like the ringleader, or like, how do you determine like who owns what piece? Like, where do you draw the lanes? Where do you draw the lines a little bit so that there's not 4 different leads happening that are all running in different directions? Or have you run? Maybe you haven't.
Yeah. In my experience, when you're putting this type quote unquote tiger team together, usually there's some pretty legitimate professionals in the room who understand roles, responsibilities, swim lanes. And they're in that room, or virtual room, for a reason. That's been my experience. So everyone's in that room. They know what they're doing and why they're there. I think we use a lot of project management tools, just to build the frameworks and the processes around that. And that's a key point. So, it helps visualize and track what you're doing tactically. But yeah, in my experience, that really hasn't been a problem. And you don't want 40 people in these meetings. You probably want 1 to 2 to 3 from each group, depending on the size of the internal organization.
Yeah, I'd say in that crisis plan, usually at the start of it, you include who would be in the war room, right? And this is the small but important community that needs to be alerted all at the same time right away. And it's going to be, of course, general counsel, whatever the head of IT's title is, CIO, VP IT, marketing, of course, why we're here today. But your chief people or your chief HR person too, right? Geoff, who else include in that?
And one thing, it's not just senior leadership people in that room, because there's a lot of, I don't want to call them low level, but analysts, managers that are, social media manager, a community manager, a PR manager, PR director.
Your frontline team, for lack of a better.
Right. And so I like to make sure that those people are pretty sharp, as, you want to hire good people, but knowing that, they understand what's going on. A lot of times they're just flies on the wall listening, but they understand, and they can, absorb and have the situational awareness, during it. And that term comes up a lot. You've probably heard me say it. Situational awareness is a term we use a lot, and we use it daily. Understanding, because it changes so fast, understanding how external or internal factors have to evolve, how it changes what you're doing and how you respond. So that's half the battle, in my opinion. Where you don't have situational awareness is when you learn about something in the media, or your customers learn about something about you in the media. Then I don't want to say the battle's lost, but it's an uphill battle.
Yeah. And sometimes, depending on severity, you need the board members, board chair in the room, and the CFO, because this is going to involve oftentimes, investor relations, and it can even impact a company's credit rating, right? Mm-hmm. Especially on the side of the amount of the ransom. Right.
Yeah.
And insurance is obviously involved too. In fact, most of the time, when a client gets into a data breach, we're actually paid by their insurance company, not the client itself. So keep that element in mind too.
Yeah, you could probably do 3 more podcasts on cyber insurance at this point, because that's a rabbit hole in itself. One thing I did want to point out when we're talking about who's in the war room, from my experience, the actual incident response war room, like something has happened, is quite different than the recurring tactical war room, or incident response meeting that you have every week, month, quarter, whatever it is. The one that happens during an incident is definitely a higher level of people, because you'll not saying you will, but you could have your external forensics team. You could have law enforcement. You'll likely have external counsel. Mm-hmm. You'll have a lot of external parties in there that are there to help. I mean, you're going back to one of the main themes, you are a victim, and they are there to help because some sort of criminal activity has been taken out against you. But again, it's a lot to take on. So I hope, we've provided a lot of perspective and, understanding to, marketers and communication professionals is, what to expect, and maybe where they need to focus their efforts on.
Reducing that fear, because the fear is what prevents us from making the plan in the first place. And knowing that we're prepared makes handling anything 1,000 times easier.
Responding rationally.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, parting thoughts, guys. I mean, we've covered so much, and to your point, Geoff, probably could keep going for 3 more episodes, but I think this is just such a great primer that we've been able to provide today. I've learned a lot. I'm sure our audience has as well. Any thoughts to wrap up on from either of you that we haven't covered?
I mean, I guess mine would be, if you're haven't started, start today. Yeah. And if you have an agency of record, a PR agency, engage them about a crisis communication plan, particularly those types of agencies who specialize in that, who have dealt with it, who have the experience in it. It'll remove a lot of anxiety and fear, knowing that you're ready. But yeah, if you haven't start, or if you've fallen out of practice, start that behavior back again.
Yeah, totally. That's a great point. If you're doing an agency search, put in the RFP. You should know if they have experience and get an example. The last thing I would say is, depending on how big your marketing team is and how siloed it is, you've got to have everyone on the same page, from media relations experts to whoever manages your SEO to whoever manages customer communications and your marketing automation platform, be in content, right? Because they're all going to have to come together in these scenarios to work in concert and stay on message.
Thank you both for being here. Geoff, Anna Ruth, this has been a great episode. Happy to have you back anytime. Glad to chat.
We'd
Thank
love
you.
it.
It's a pleasure.
Talk about more positive things in the future.
Yes. We're just removing fear today so that people can go ahead and enjoy their companies and good days, the good days that we're prepared for. So thank you both. This has been the Provoke Media Podcast. I'm Megan Miller, and this is Anna Ruth Williams and Geoff Blaine. And we are so grateful for you both being here. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Provoke podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.